So it's shaped up as a tremendous Belmont on paper, and it lived up to that on the racetrack. We got the 1, 2, 3 finishers from the Derby, same order in the Belmont. First time that's happened since 1977. Sovereignty ran down Journalism in the stretch and kicked away late. Super, super impressive, and clearly the best horse in the race. He ran his last quarter in under 24 seconds, which is just unheard of for a 1.25 mile dirt race. Like, I can't remember the last time I saw that. Maybe like Arrogate or something like that. It's crazy rare for that to happen. And, he was much the best. I still got to tip my cap to Journalism for showing up in all 3 races. Like, that was a much tougher ask than the 5-week break that Sovereignty got. And, now the question is obviously that some people have is, could Sovereignty have won the Triple Crown? And I think I heard that there were some people on the broadcast talking about that. Well, this shows that he would have won the Triple Crown. I think that really undersells what Journalism did in the Preakness and the way he fought through that tight opening in the stretch and, was game as hell and came and ran down Gosger. I think you got to tip your cap to him. And, this is it. We could have seen it. We could have seen if Sovereignty would have won the Triple Crown, if Belmont had decided to go to the Preakness. He obviously made the right call in that, he had a fresh horse and he was much the best in the Belmont. But it's great for racing. Like, the fact that we have at least a little bit of a rivalry now. Like, I was watching, pardon the interruption, and they did like 2.5 minutes on the Belmont. I was like, when was the last time a mainstream show did a segment on the Belmont that didn't have a Triple Crown on the line? And I can't remember that ever happening. So I think it's great for the sport. They're obviously the 2 best horses in the crop by far. Maybe Sandman or some other ones can come knocking later this summer. And I just got to tip my hat to both horses and the connections.
And Joe, we talked about it before, in the previous episode, about there were 4 or 5 horses in the Belmont that we really were looking forward to running, and none of them disappointed. They all, ran to their form. They all ran very well. I think, you appropriately gave a tip of the cap to all the right connections. I thought Baeza run a really solid 3rd place finish. Is he the superstar that everyone was anticipating because of his famous brothers? Maybe not, but he is certainly a top 3-year-old, and will continue to have a great career ahead of him, for the upcoming races. If he wasn't out of Puka, I think maybe he wouldn't necessarily have gotten the kind of fanfare that he got. But you know what? I'm happy that we had a good story to rally behind in the form of Baeza. And Joe, watching the race, I just put a little couple notes down as I was watching the race for the first time. It was a clean break, which was great. So there was no problem as far as horses getting out of the gate and getting into the position they want. I was surprised Journalism was a little closer than I anticipated. And I don't know if that was by design or just the fact that Rispoli said, hey, I want to make sure that I keep outside position and that there's nobody in my way. And I'm going to, the horse naturally was feeling good and was up there a little closer. But, the day belonged to Sovereignty. I mean, he just continued to do what he's doing, improving almost every race. Again, like I said last time, I couldn't remember the last time Into Mischief won 1.25 miles. Well, now he's done it twice, so shame on me for that misspeak. But I think the race kind of played out the way you anticipated. Rodriguez and Crudo going up to the front and everyone else kind of, sitting off them and then making a big run. But I think this shows the depth of field for the 3-year-old crop. And I think that it looks like it's going to be a really fun rest of the year, whether it's Journalism going back to the West Coast and hopefully, probably dominating those races out there, and the rest of the group staying here and running in a host of other races, whether it's Jim Dandy, the Travers, the Pennsylvania Derby, and then ultimately getting these 3-year-olds to step up and have to run against the older mates in the Sierra Leones of the world and that group. So it is a group of deep 3-year-olds, and I'm really looking forward to probably half a dozen of them making their way into the starting gate for the Classic.
Yeah, well, and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the year. It was like, if you gave me like just straight up any 3-year-old versus any older horse in a bet for the Breeders' Cup Classic, I would take the 3-year-olds. And I think that that's bolstered by the fact that Fierceness ran second in the Met Mile with no excuse. Like we think of him as like one of the top older horses in America, and obviously had the big race at Churchill, but he's not he's vulnerable sometimes.
Right.
And we just saw Sierra Leone lose at a short price down in Louisiana. Haven't seen him since. Probably going to see him on Stephen Foster in a couple of weeks. So a lot of question marks with the older horses in this year in this division. So yeah, I think the at least the top 2 3-year-olds, I would take them against any older horse right now. And that's a pretty jarring and stark thing to say on June 10th. That we already are going to take the 3-year-olds over the older horses, because you got to think they're just going to keep getting better and better. And Sovereignty, by the way, looked amazing on the track. Like when he walked past, we were hanging out at the post bar to watch the horses go out to the track. He was spitting and breathing fire, and I was like, wow, it's going to take a lot to beat him, because Journalism is like a smaller horse. He's not as robust as Sovereignty was, and it's interesting, like being a mile and a quarter. You wonder if a mile and a half Sovereignty would have put on a real show, and maybe ran up the score to win by like a dozen lengths or so, because he strikes me as that kind of horse that the more distance, the better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's other races that are going to be coming in that are going to fill in the gaps over the next couple of weeks. One obviously is the Jim Dandy that people are pointing towards, and that our Sandman is going to be poised, for that race, breezing and working with blinkers now to try to get him a little more focused. Because Joe, as Mark didn't say this in the interview. He talked to us about it a little bit in the pre-interview about how he really feels like that Sandman has just been doing all of this production on his own merit and like not even really being focused. So he's just kind of doing it because it's fun for him and he's that talented. I'm hoping that the blinkers are going to, get him to focus and maybe move him up a couple of lengths and give him a chance to catch up on some of his brethren, 3-year-olds.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, you obviously hope he catches up to those 3-year-olds, and I think the blinkers have got to help. But I wanted to follow up real quick, because we talked about last week whether or not there being a Sandman effect, so to speak, on the handle, because the Preakness handle and the Derby handle was so good, and especially the Preakness handle I thought was kind of like it's kind of an anomaly, anomalously good.
Sure.
I may have just made up a word, but the Belmont Stakes card on Saturday saw over $101 million in all sources handle, but that's down from the $125.7 million wagered last year. Still was better than the 2022 total of $98.8 million. The Belmont Stakes race itself handled about $55 million. I think that it's tough to say, whether or not there was that kind of effect from having a really popular horse not in the race, because and on the card, because the 2 races were taken off the turf and moved to or a couple races taken off turf and then a couple were canceled and moved to Sunday. So I think it's not an apples to apples thing, but it's a little interesting that handle was down that much. I think overall it was still a really good card. A lot of gaps between races. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So 101 million all sources handled, down from 125 last year.